Okay, thank you everybody for coming. My name is Colin Howard, this is BreAnn Thornton, and this is Hanna Harrington. And we're going to do a presentation on conflict management involving critical thinking. Now, as you can see, we've all been in and probably seen arguments like this, conversations that happen like this. What we're going to hopefully demonstrate to you is when we apply critical thinking, conversations are going to look like this, even involving cultural differences and age differences. There's no reason why people can't get along. I'm going to begin. Conflict affects our lives on a continuous basis, and it can cause undue stress, which in turn can lead to a host of physical and physiological problems. We encounter conflict with various family members, in relationships, and at work. How we deal with conflict can make an enormous impact on our lives and the lives of other people. Unresolved conflict can lead to estrangement from family members. It can lead to a separation with romantic partners and friends. And it can lead to disciplinary actions and even termination at work. Critical thinking skills applied to conflict is perhaps the most productive way to come to a manageable resolution. To develop critical thinking skills, we first need to ask ourselves, what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is logical thinking that is well-reasoned, unbiased, and clear. It is thinking that is never selfish and is always fair-minded. It incorporates mindfulness, which is a state of awareness where you are conscious of the reasons for your thinking and behaving. So how do we use critical thinking to resolve conflicts? Well, since people and circumstances are always changing, learn to see events, objects, and people in different ways. Always be open to new information and points of view. This will assist you in challenging old beliefs and attitudes that you may have and help you see other people's points of view. Don't rely too heavily on first impressions. Be prepared to revise, reject, and even accept your initial impression, but only after finding out additional data to validate your feelings. Be mindful to think before you act, especially in situations where emotions are involved. Take a few breaths, relax, and stick to the topic at hand. Remember, the point is to resolve conflict for everyone's benefit. Now that you have some idea of what critical thinking is, let's examine how we can apply it to resolve disputes. Hanna?
Conflict in a family is something everyone experiences because most everyone has some resemblance of a family. One obvious factor that can cause conflict within a family relation is generational gap between people that are raised in separate decades. Wikipedia defines generational gap as a term popularized in the Western countries during 1960s, referring to differences between people of younger generations and their elders, especially between children and their parents. Also, significant generational differences were found from work to family, family interfering with work, and work interfering with family. That can be another cause of generational family conflict. As in all conflict resolution, critical thinking stresses the importance of concentrating on the problem and not the person. BreAnn and Colin have prepared a skit for you so you can get a better idea and understanding of what generational family conflict is. BreAnn is an 18-year-old college student and is majoring in marketing and eventually hopes to be an ad executive in New York City. Colin is her father that is coming to terms with the fact that his little baby girl is not a baby girl anymore and will soon be out on her own and away from him and his wife. The two of them enter into a conversation concerning BreAnn's summer break between freshman year of college and sophomore year of college.
Dad, I'm going to go spend my summer break from college in New York City with my friend Alice.
What? When did you decide this? You need to get a job this summer and at least pay for some of the textbooks for next semester. You think money grows on trees? You teenagers nowadays, I swear, you have no work ethic. Back in my day, you worked, and things weren't handed to you on a silver platter. I think I've spoiled you raising you the way I did.
I don't want to hear this again. I've heard it my whole life. You're so old-fashioned, it's no wonder you know how to use a cell phone. In case you haven't noticed, I'm 18 years old. I'm an adult. I can do what I want.
Oh, really? You can do what you want? Like pay for college, food, that car you drive around in? Look, there's no way you're going to go off to New York City and party all summer. That's it. Final. End of discussion.
Let's examine this conflict further and how critical thinking, when applied correctly, can profoundly reduce the stress involved in this encounter. First, before the encounter is even started, both should consider the generational gap between the two and how they both view the world differently. Notice that Colin moved straight to the accusatory tone and didn't focus on the issue at hand and his true feelings about his daughter leaving. Notice how BreAnn started the conversation off and fed off of Colin's tone, and which led to an argument. Consider if both BreAnn and Colin understood the very distinct generational gap that may exist between individuals raised in different decades. Notice how, let's look at the scenario again, but this time participants are critical thinkers and they apply the skill to the conversation.
Dad, you know that one day I want to live in New York and do advertising. I have an opportunity to go there this summer with my friend Alice and do an internship.
Wow. You know, it breaks my heart to see my little girl growing up so fast. You know, one day you'll be out on your own with a family of your own. But listen, I was hoping you'd get a job this summer and possibly at least have to pay for some textbooks because money's being real tight. Plus, I'm not crazy about the idea of you and Alice being alone in New York City all summer.
I know money is tight right now, but it's not to party. Alice's aunt and uncle live there. We could be staying there and I can go summer intern at agency. I know it's not paying position, but I think the experience can really help me out. With this experience, I could go part-time and even advertising business and help pay for books for school.
Well, I can see you thought this through. I'm still not crazy about you being so far away, but I appreciate the reasons why you want to do this. You know, I often thought teenagers nowadays don't have the same work ethic as teenagers did in my time. But I can see how this benefits you. Well, promise to call me every day and you got a deal.
Notice in the second encounter, emotions were kept in check and the conversation, which could have spun out of control, went in an entirely different direction. There is still going to be conflict, perhaps Colin emotionally resisting change and BreAnn fighting to find her identity. But by both of them being critical thinkers, the conflict was managed. This led to a stressful encounter and a better relationship between a father and a daughter.
In addition to a family relationship, critical thinking can play a huge part in resolving conflicts within personal relationships. As you might have guessed, men and women think vastly different from each other. In his popular book, Men and Women from Mars, Women Are from Venus, author Dr. John Gray reports that arguments thrive on men failing to pay attention to women's feelings and women being critical, disapproving of men. These differences can obviously lead to great conflict, which is evidenced in some recent statistics. According to the Clark County, Indiana office, domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women between the age of 15 and 44 in the United States. Now, obviously, there may be more factors involved that can contribute to violence in relationships, but I submit that critical thinking skills applied to conflict resolution is a necessary first step to successful anger management. Also, in dealing with relationship conflict, remember, try and avoid over-attribution, which is the prosperity to apply too much of a person's behavior to one of their characteristics. For example, she thinks that way because she is a woman, or he thinks that way because he is Muslim. Human beings are social animals and healthy. Personal relationships are necessary and ingredients for a living, balanced life.
Thank you, BreAnn. Okay, so let's move on to examine conflict at work and the enormous costs it has on production and company management. Millions of dollars and countless of hours are spent annually on conflict resolution. I'm sure many of you have heard the phrase, time is money. In fact, Daniel Dana, in his book titled Managing Differences, How to Build Better Relationships at Home and Work, and Barbara J. Cressman, in her scholarly article, Insights into Employee Motivation, Commitment, and Retention, both report research that shows 60 to 80% of all difficulties in organizations stem from strained relationships between employees, not from deficits in individual employee skill or motivation. Also, in the 2005 May article, the Washington Business Journal reported that the typical manager spends 25 to 40% of his or her time dealing with workplace conflicts. That's 1 to 2 days of every work week in conflict resolution and not doing production. Now, obviously, being a manager is always going to encompass some conflict resolution. But imagine if employees could resolve some of the everyday minor conflicts on their own and not involve management. Literally millions of dollars can be saved nationwide. Understand that part of critical thinking is knowing to avoid ethnocentrism, which is a tendency to see other people's behaviors through your own cultural filters. Also, always be aware of stereotyping, which is a fixed impression of a group of people. Now, we're going to hopefully demonstrate conflict in the workplace and how critical thinking can be used to resolve it. Some background and information. BreAnn and Hanna are co-workers at a large multicultural technical software company that has offices in several different countries. They are both approximately the same age. Hanna has been working at the company for several years, while BreAnn had just got hired on a few months ago. Also, Hanna was born and raised in a westernized, individualist family culture in Houston, Texas, while BreAnn was raised in a conservative, collective family culture in Pakistan. We can consider how these vastly different cultural ideas can lead to conflict in an everyday work atmosphere.
Hey, me and the girls are going out for a few drinks at the steakhouse. Would you want to go?
No, thank you. I have plans.
You know, every time I ask you out with us, you always have something else to do. Is everybody where you're from so antisocial?
You people, what's that supposed to mean? I happen to be a vegetarian and drinking is against my religion. I didn't start working at this company to be bullied by racists who don't accept points of views. I think management needs to be aware of this.
Okay, so in this scenario, Hanna was attempting to make BreAnn feel more included by asking her out with friends. But she didn't consider the cultural differences that BreAnn may have. Like, eating meat is against what she believes in. She's a vegetarian. Drinking alcohol also. So that might not have been the best atmosphere for BreAnn to feel comfortable in, drinking and going to a steakhouse. BreAnn didn't take the gesture for what it was meant to be, a gesture of kindness. She looked at her perceived idea of what Hanna was in her eyes, a westernized party girl who doesn't have the same values she was raised in. Imagine if both women took the time to consider each other's cultural differences before and during contact.
Hey, me and a few of the girls for work, we're hoping to take you out to get to know you better. What kind of food do you like?
I'm a vegetarian, so I normally have to bring my own lunch.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, there's this new organic grill, and they have great vegetarian items on the menu. Would you want to go?
That's nice of you to offer. I love that. I'm kind of a culture shock since I've been working here, so it may be a good idea for all of us to learn to know each other.
Okay, so in the second scenario, Hanna, realizing that BreAnn was from a different culture, starts out by telling BreAnn her intentions. So there's less of a chance of a misunderstanding. This gave BreAnn a clear understanding of what Hanna was trying to do, and it also gave BreAnn a chance to add some cultural characteristics of her own. Hanna responded by expressing interest and offering an atmosphere where all the women would feel comfortable in talking and socializing. And from that point, the women could find out more about each other and maybe break any preconceived notions about each other's culture. The conversation did not end in conflict, at least to the point where management could have to get involved. So in conclusion, to avoid conflict means to avoid contact with people. So conflict in many ways is inevitable. The trick is to become educated on critical thinking and then to apply these skills to manage conflict. Also, be aware of the cultural differences of different people to better prepare yourself when conflict arises. Utilizing critical thinking is not only a productive way to resolve conflict, but is an effective technique that can be applied to other dialogues in our lives, such as opinions on political matters, legislation, and religion. Critical thinking helps reassure us that opinions are not always just a matter of personal preference or taste, and it helps us respect the cultural differences in all people. The bottom line is that critical thinking is an essential tool that works. Thank you.